Rain poured heavily over the old rented house, the sound of water dripping from the cracked gutters mixing with the distant growl of thunder. A dim yellow light spilled from a single window, flickering slightly as if the house itself was breathing. Inside, the air felt damp and cold. Nancy moved quietly through the living room, her face pale, her eyes heavy from nights without sleep. She lit a candle and placed it in front of a framed photograph of Dorothy, her mother, who had died only a week ago. Kevin sat on the couch, staring at the empty rocking chair across the room. The chair where Dorothy used to sit every evening. The house was quiet except for the faint creak of the chair, rocking ever so slightly on its own. That night, Kevin woke to a faint, irregular tapping sound coming from inside the walls, followed by a soft, distant humming, a melody he swore was the same one Dorothy used to hum while knitting. He got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. The shadows stretched unnaturally long under the dim light. Passing by Dorothy's old room, he noticed the door was slightly open. The air around it felt heavier, colder. The next day, while Kevin sat quietly in the kitchen, Nancy stepped outside to speak with their neighbor, Mrs. Harris, a frail old woman with sharp, watchful eyes. In a low, uneasy tone, she told Nancy about the house's dark past, about a man named Charles, who had lived there decades ago. He had slowly lost his mind, claiming the walls spoke to him, until one night he hung himself in the living room. Every tenant who came after spoke of whispers, strange shadows, and the feeling of being watched, and most never stayed long. That night, Kevin tried to sleep but woke again, this time to see Dorothy's silhouette standing perfectly still in his doorway, her head slightly tilted, her features hidden in shadow. When he blinked, she was gone. The following morning, Kevin was found sitting in the living room, pale and shaking, unwilling to speak about what he saw. Nancy tried to dismiss it as grief, but the moment she turned her back, the rocking chair behind her began moving on its own, its wooden legs scraping softly against the floor. The lights flickered, and the air turned icy. Nancy froze in place while Kevin stared wide-eyed at the chair, his breath quickening. That evening, a violent storm rolled in, the wind howling against the walls. The power went out, leaving only the faint glow of candlelight. Long, warped shadows danced across the wallpaper, twisting unnaturally with each flicker of the flame. Then came a loud, bone-rattling bang from Dorothy's old room. They ran to the door, only to find it locked from the inside. Heavy footsteps paced back and forth, followed by a low, chilling whisper that seemed to seep through the wood. "Get out." Nancy reached for the handle, but it burned her skin as if it had been sitting over a fire. And then, the twist. The footsteps inside the locked room stopped, and instead of silence, the sound of frantic scratching filled the air. It came from the inside of the wall. Kevin stepped back in horror as a handprint began pressing outward from the wallpaper, stretching the material like skin. It wasn't Dorothy's hand. The fingers were long, thin, and twisted. With a sudden, violent tear, a pale, bony hand pushed through the wall, followed by part of a gaunt face with sunken eyes and a rope burn across its neck. The shadows in the room writhed, forming the shape of a man with a noose hanging from his throat. Charles. The living room door slammed shut, trapping them. The walls darkened, as if soaked in ink, and the shadows began pulling away from the corners, growing into figures. Among them was Dorothy's shadow, her arm outstretched, pointing toward the front door. Kevin realized in that instant that she wasn't the one haunting them. She was trying to protect them. The man's shadow lunged forward, knocking over the candles, plunging them into near darkness. A deafening wind tore through the room, carrying a deep, guttural scream. Kevin squeezed his eyes shut, his mind racing. The more he told himself that Charles wasn't real, the more the figure seemed to break apart, fragments of shadow ripping away like smoke in the wind. Seizing the moment, Nancy grabbed Kevin's hand, and together they ran for the front door. The shadow tried to block their way, but its form was already crumbling, its voice breaking into distorted howls. They burst outside into the storm, rain hitting them in cold sheets. Behind them, the windows of the house slammed shut one by one. For a brief second, through an upstairs window, they saw Dorothy's silhouette watching them. She smiled faintly, her outline shimmering before fading into nothing. Kevin never went back to that house. But on certain nights when the wind howls through the trees, he swears he can still hear the faint, slow creak of the rocking chair, waiting for someone else to sit.